But right, let's jump into our deep dive today. We're all gathered here because, well, military history, especially European history, kind of gets us going, right? Absolutely. So let's talk about Alexander the Great, the Macedonian king who just steamrolled the Persian Empire in his 20s and wasn't even close to being done. He was remarkable, but how did these conquests, which didn't even last that long really, actually shape European history? Yeah, what echoes are left of this king who, dared to try and conquer the whole known world? That's what we'll be uncovering today. The story of his ambition, for sure, the power struggles that came after, and of course, the whole beginning of the Hellenistic period. It's fascinating because he wasn't just some conqueror. Yeah, right. He ended up causing this blend of cultures that lasted for centuries, and ultimately that blend, it influenced the Europe we see today. He really was a catalyst. Okay, so the conquest of Persia. I think we all know about the Battle of Gaugamela. Oh, absolutely. Textbook military brilliance, outmaneuvering Darius III. But what I'm really curious about is what happened after. Well, Gaugamela was a turning point, no question. But it didn't just hand Alexander the Persian Empire on a silver platter, right? He still had to chase down Darius III, who was trying to rally his troops. And here's where Alexander's political smarts really come in. When Darius was ultimately betrayed and killed by Bessus, his own satrap, why? Alexander spun the story, he made sure everyone saw him as avenging Darius's death, even had Bessus executed, but in this really gruesome way, making it clear he was powerful, and he was ruthless. So even in the middle of conquering, he was already thinking about solidifying his rule. And of course, then he took those major Persian capitals, Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, though the story of Persepolis has always stuck with me. Oh yes, the ceremonial capital, looted and burned. Some say was an accident, others, a deliberate act of revenge. What do you think? Honestly, the burning of Persepolis, it's still debated today. Could have been drunken destruction, some sources say that. Or a calculated move to signal the end of Persian rule. But no matter the intention, destroying a city like that, it really speaks to the brutal side of conquest. Yeah, the chaos that comes with it. Even amidst these grand victories, the human cost of war, definitely makes Alexander's campaign a lot more complex. He wasn't just the liberator, right? No. And there's that shift we see in him after conquering Persia. He starts adopting their customs, their clothing. He even introduces proskynesis, prostrating before the king. Yeah, if it didn't go over well at his Macedonian buddies, I can't imagine. I imagine you're this hardened Macedonian soldier. You fought beside your king, he's like one of you, really. Right. And suddenly he wants you bowing down like the Persians. Total culture clash. Created huge rifts within Alexander's own army and led to some pretty tragic stuff, like Claudius the Black. Oh yeah! Saved Alexander in battle, close friend, but he dared to criticize this whole Persian thing. And Alexander, in a fit of rage, kills him. You can practically feel the tension building, the Macedonians feeling betrayed. The incident with Claudius, that's like a huge turning point. It shows Alexander's growing paranoia. He's ready to get rid of anyone, even close friends, if they challenge him. And it wasn't entirely paranoia either. There were plots against him, like the Philotas conspiracy. Philotas, son of Formundium, Alexander's most trusted general. Was he guilty? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know for sure. But his execution, and his father's too, that sent shockwaves through the army. You have to wonder, did all this ambition, his changing character, did it all contribute to his empire falling apart? Even before his death, it feels like his grip on power is weakening. It's a valid point. In his later years, there's a shift. He becomes more isolated, leans more on his Persian advisors, alienates his Macedonian core even further, and that conflict between his roots and his aspirations, it's going to play a huge role in the chaos after he dies. But before we get there, let's talk about India. Yes. He wasn't content with just Persia, right? Had to push further. So off to India he goes, wants to conquer the whole subcontinent. His ambition knew no bounds. He fought his way across the Indus River, even went against local rulers like Porus at the Battle of the Hydaspes. That's the one where the Indian forces used war elephants. Oh wow, first time Alexander's army had seen anything like that? Must have been an incredible sight. Winning battles, pushing east, and then he hits a wall. Exactly. At the Hyphasis River, today it's the Bees River, his army just refused to go on. He'd had enough. They were exhausted, homesick, years of campaigning, countless battles, staring down this huge, unfamiliar territory. Even Alexander, with all his charisma, couldn't convince them. Well, it really shows you the limits of human endurance, huh? Yeah, even for a legendary conqueror. Yeah. You need your soldiers on your side no matter how great a leader you are. Weavings go into Alexander's mind at that point. Oh, it must have been a huge blow to his ego. To be forced to turn back like that, his ambition thwarted, not by some enemy, but his own men. By his own men. I think it gives us a glimpse of Alexander's human side, you know? He wasn't above disappointment, frustration. So he turns back, marches back across Persia, gets back to Babylon, makes it his capital. And then, less than a year later, at 32, he's gone. Still a mystery how he died. Was it an illness? Fever, maybe? Or something more sinister? Right, there were rumors. So many theories, malaria, poison. No one knows for sure. There's this toxicologist, Dr. Leo Shapp. He thinks that might have been Veratrum album, a poisonous plant. Adds another layer of intrigue to the whole story. Here's this young king, conquered so much, dies suddenly at the peak of his power. What happens to his empire then? Does it just crumble? Not right away, but the seeds of chaos were there. See, Alexander had no clear heir. His half-brother Aridaeus wasn't really fit to rule, and his wife Roxana, she was pregnant when he died. Oh, wow. So you've got this power vacuum, and Alexander's generals, the Diadochi, they're all ready to jump in. The Diadochi, now things are about to get interesting. Right. These weren't just any generals. They fought alongside Alexander, saw his brilliance firsthand, and who knows, maybe some of them had their own ambitions brewing. Setting the stage for one massive power struggle. They were united under Alexander, and now they're going to tear his empire apart. It's a fascinating part of history for sure. So we're back, and things are about to get, well, messy. We left off with Alexander's sudden death, remember? And that power vacuum just waiting to implode. Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing, actually. These guys, united under Alexander, they're about to rip his empire to shreds. Oh yeah, it wasn't just about grabbing land either. This was about ideology. Each Diadochi, they had their own vision for what Alexander's legacy and theirs would be. You know, for someone who loves military history, where do you think things really blew up first? Has to be Ptolemy's move. Bold move. He was governor of Egypt, right? Right. And when they're taking Alexander's body back to Macedonia for burial, Ptolemy intercepts the whole procession, takes the body to Egypt. Huge symbolic move. In Macedonian tradition, only the rightful king could bury the previous one. Oh, I see. So Ptolemy's basically saying, I'm the guy, or at least I'm a major player, don't forget about me. He's not wasting any time. It's like you saying, forget waiting around, I'm taking what's mine. Exactly. And this theft, this is what kicks off the wars of the Successors. It's a catalyst for sure. What were some of the key conflicts that really shaped European history? Well, those first 3 decades after Alexander died, it was pure chaos. Alliances shifting, betrayals left and right, full-on wars. One of the biggest, most impactful has to be the Battle of Ipsus. 301 BC. Antigonus, he'd become incredibly powerful, controlled most of Asia Minor, to basically trying to put Alexander's empire back together under his rule. Exactly. But he was facing a coalition. Seleucus, Ptolemy, Lysimachus, the other major players. Clash of ambitions. A battle to decide who was the true heir to Alexander. What happened? Decisive victory for the coalition. Antigonus was killed. His dream of a unified empire shattered. That battle, it basically sealed the deal. Alexander's empire gets carved up into 4 major kingdoms. So out of this chaos, rise these 4 Hellenistic kingdoms. It's like watching a new era being born, right out of the ashes of the old one. You've got the Antigonans in Greece, the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids controlling what was Persia, and the Attalids over in Asia Minor. Wow. And what were the long-term consequences of this, this whole empire being split up? Well, their impact on European history is huge. I mean, they weren't just little copies of Alexander's empire. These were brand new entities blending Greek culture with the traditions of the lands they ruled. It's fascinating to imagine how that mixing of cultures actually played out. Like the Seleucid Empire, for example. They controlled a vast territory, from Asia Minor all the way to parts of India. How did they manage to rule such a diverse realm? Oh, they faced enormous challenges, that's for sure. But they were surprisingly good at integrating their different subjects. They founded a ton of new cities, many named after Alexander or, members of their own dynasty. Yes. And they encouraged Greek settlers to move there. So that helped spread the Greek language, art, ideas throughout their territory. They were spreading Hellenistic culture. Yes. But they also adapted to local customs, incorporated things like Babylonian astronomy and mathematics into their own knowledge systems. They even adopted some aspects of Persian administration because it was just so effective, the infrastructure was already there. So it wasn't one-sided. There was a real exchange happening. Oh, absolutely. It wasn't just the Seleucids either. all of these Hellenistic kingdoms, they were contributing to this cultural fusion. It's amazing to think about. Alexander sets out to conquer and ends up, unintentionally, paving the way for this cultural explosion. He was a catalyst for sure, but we can't forget, these were still kingdoms competing for power. Were there other major military conflicts that shaped the Hellenistic world? Definitely. The Wars of the Successors, those were the big kickoff, leading to the formation of these four kingdoms. But the fighting didn't just stop. These kingdoms, they clashed constantly, fighting over land, influence, always vying for an edge. Exactly. And they had threats from outside too, like the Galatians, Celtic tribes who moved into Asia Minor. They clashed with both the Seleucids and the Attalids, and the Antigonids in Greece. Constant pressure from neighbors and rebellions when in their own kingdom. So all these conflicts, they drove military innovation, shaped the whole political landscape of the Hellenistic world. It's like this never-ending game of chess. Each kingdom making its move, trying to hold on to power, protect their position. But what about Alexander's military legacy, specifically? How did his tactics and strategies influence these Hellenistic armies? Well, Alexander was a military genius, no question, and his innovations, they had a lasting impact on how wars were fought during this whole period. The heart of his army was the Macedonian phalanx, the phalanx. Tight formation of infantry, heavily armed with these long spears called cuirasses. Combined that with disciplined cavalry charges and some pretty innovative siege warfare, and you have an incredibly effective force no matter who you're fighting. So the Diadochi inherited this powerful military machine. But did they just copy Alexander's playbook, or did they adapt, innovate? They definitely built on what he did, but they had to adapt to new challenges. The Seleucids, for example, they were facing war elephants in the east. Right, we talked about those earlier. They had to come up with new tactics to deal with those. They also started using lighter troops, more archers, recognizing that they needed flexibility in such a vast, diverse empire. It's fascinating how warfare kept evolving. So we've got these Hellenistic kingdoms, all dealing with Alexander's legacy in their own way, creating new cultural identities, and always fighting for power. It was a period of immense change, upheaval, but what does it all mean for us trying to understand European history? What's the big takeaway? That's the key, right? The Hellenistic period, it's a bridge between classical Greece and the Roman world that comes after. It's a time of transition where Greek culture spreads east, influencing everything from art and architecture to philosophy and even science. Wow. This fusion of Greek and Eastern ideas, that's what has such a profound impact on Western civilization. We still see it today in our art, our architecture, philosophy, science, even our political system. It's almost mind-boggling. This young king goes out to conquer and ends up creating this cultural phenomenon that still shapes us centuries later. It's a testament to how interconnected history truly is. One event, one decision, and the consequences ripple through time. It's like throwing a stone in a pond. Exactly, and it reminds us that military history, it's not just about battles and who won or lost. It's about understanding this complex web of cause and effect, the unintended consequences, the legacies that endure. Well said. So, as we move into the final part of our deep dive, we're going to explore how this vibrant Hellenistic world ultimately gives way to the rise of Rome, and how even as Alexander's empire faded, his legacy continued to echo through the ages. So we've been tracing these ripples, right? Of Alexander's conquests, the Diadochi rising up, their kingdoms in this whole fusion of cultures in the Hellenistic world. It's been a wild ride. Ambition, conflict, innovation. But like all eras, this one had to come to an end too. What happened? What led to the decline of this vibrant Hellenistic world? Well, for all their achievements, these Hellenistic kingdoms, they were kind of fragile from the start, born out of conflict, and conflict never really left them. It's true, they were always at war with someone. Internally, too, they had economic troubles, political instability, and succession crises that just wouldn't quit. It's almost like they couldn't escape Alexander's shadow. Always trying to prove themselves. Yeah, always competing for legitimacy, for a piece of his glory, and all the while, this new power is growing in the West. Rome, initially a city-state, right on the Italian peninsula. But somehow they become this dominant force that overshadows the entire Hellenistic world. It's amazing when you think about it. How did they do it? Well, Rome's rise is a story in itself. Military skill, political strategy, and being in the right place at the right time, for sure. A bit of luck never hurts. Early on, they weren't focused on expanding beyond Italy. They were getting their own house in order, building up their military, learning from their enemies. But then they get into these conflicts with Carthage, like Carthage, a powerful empire based in North Africa, and these conflicts, they pull Rome into the wider Mediterranean world. That's where the Punic Wars come in, some of the most famous battles ever. Didn't Hannibal, the Carthaginian general, march an army with elephants over the Alps? He did. Hannibal was a brilliant military mind, but ultimately Rome won those wars. And those victories, they gave Rome control of key territories, a ton of wealth, and a battle-hardened army, and, a taste for expansion. They'd got a taste of victory. So Rome's getting stronger, expanding its territory. And eventually that puts them on a collision course with the Hellenistic kingdoms. It was inevitable. Rome's growing power, you couldn't ignore it. They started meddling in the affairs of the Hellenistic kingdoms, often taking advantage of their internal squabbles, turning one against the other, classic divide and conquer. And their military, after the Punic Wars, it was just too strong for the Hellenistic armies. It's almost sad, these kingdoms that emerged from Alexander's conquests, they end up falling to this new power. Were there any specific events that marked the end of the Hellenistic era, like a definitive ending? Well, when the Romans conquered Greece in 146 BC after the Battle of Corinth, that's often seen as a turning point. It was the end of Greek independence, and the heart of Hellenistic culture became part of the Roman Republic. And then in 30 BC, the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt falls, the last of the major Hellenistic kingdoms. Yet, Cleopatra and Mark Antony, they're defeated. Rome takes Egypt. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, with those connections to Alexander, losing to Rome. It's like the final act in a huge drama. Poetic, in a way. The Hellenistic world, this fusion of Greek and Eastern cultures, it fades away, becomes part of the Roman Empire. But here's the thing. The influence, that didn't just disappear, right? We've been talking about all that cultural exchange, the intellectual ideas, the art and innovations. It didn't just vanish overnight. The Romans, they conquered the Hellenistic kingdoms, but they also absorbed a lot of their culture. They saw the value at it. Roman art, literature, philosophy, even their political thinking, it was all heavily influenced by Hellenistic ideas. They didn't just conquer, they integrated. That's saying, right, Greece conquered Rome culturally, even as Rome conquered Greece militarily. So, zooming out, looking at the big picture, what are the takeaways for us, military history buffs? What's the legacy of Alexander in this whole era? Alexander's legacy, it's complex, military genius, no doubt. But his conquests also set in motion these forces that reshaped the world. And the Hellenistic period, even with all its instability, it was a time of amazing cultural energy. That mix of Greek and Eastern ideas, that exchange of knowledge and traditions, it had a huge impact on Western civilization, even today. We see it in our art, architecture, philosophy, science, even our political systems. It's incredible, isn't it? This young king setting out to conquer the world ends up creating this cultural phenomenon that still shapes us centuries later. Absolutely, it really shows how interconnected history is. One event, one choice can trigger all these consequences that ripple through time. That's what makes studying history so fascinating, and that's what makes military history so much more than just battles in general. It's about understanding those connections, the unintended outcomes, the legacies that shape our world. Well said. So there we have it, folks, our deep dive into the world of Alexander the Great. The rise and fall of the Hellenistic kingdoms, and the impact it all had on the course of European history. We hope you enjoyed the journey. We hope it sparked your curiosity to learn even more about this incredible period in history. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and as always, keep learning.